Hey, Kelso, welcome to the Divestopedia Exit Strategy Insights. How are you today?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, I love the background you have there. Is that a specific artist that you have on your wall, or just a collection of paintings that you've collected over the years?
I think it's probably some of our creative background. Both myself and my wife really like to collect things and get into the art. One of them that you can't see, but I'll adjust the camera, is this is an old picture frame. It's hard to see up here, but we picked it up at a garage sale, 10 or 15 bucks, but then we put some vinyl on top that says "Make cool shit." So that kind of summarizes what we like to get into.
I love it. I love the frame on that too. It's pretty cool. Nice. Hey, you're a serial entrepreneur. You've done a lot of buying and selling businesses, and that's why I thought it'd be great to have you on the podcast. So why don't you give me a little bit of just an overview of kind of what you've done here in the past. Some of the businesses that you've acquired, some of them you've exited out of, and then we'll dig deeper.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, I think I did my career backwards for the most part. I've started to kind of get more into education and finished up my executive MBA at the University of Alberta just recently this year. But prior to that, I kind of had this obsession or shiny object syndrome where there are just so many opportunities out there. I'm a kind of guy who's really optimistic about things. And I came across one of the first businesses that we ever acquired, my wife and I, was a screen printing and promotional products company. It had really good bones and a really good customer base, which is something that we always look for. And that kind of became our cash flow sort of, I guess it would be our baby. It was our first business that we had together. We had it for 9 years. And I exited that one in 2017, which is great to see that shortly it'll be coming up on 15 years in business. And so it's been really successful throughout COVID. It's maintained all of its staffing levels. Then I sort of pivoted to an e-commerce platform. So I have a background in software development, which is what I originally went to school for straight out of high school, and went to NAIT for programming. And then I wanted to build something that was able to be clipped onto old businesses. And when I say old, I mean traditional manufacturing and business models. So we put up e-commerce platforms to create, I guess, digital sales channels for traditional industries. And so probably my big claim to fame was a company called 310 Sign. And we did traffic supply, safety signs, and serviced a lot in the oil and gas sector, and then really pivoted over to traffic and municipalities. That has since sort of exploded. We've got a wide range of sign companies. We bought the BAMP sign company that does artisan signage and wood signs in the national park. And now we've expanded to serve really most tourist locations in Western Canada that are of major note. And then we actually exited that business in 2020, which was a really successful 4x on our money. So I think that I'm not looking for something typically that is going to become a job for us. It's something that we're working at and working on the business, and then hopefully turning it over to somebody else to run for the long term. So I'd probably summarize it as flipping a business, but in a 3 to 5 year window, and also 26 residential and commercial properties along the way. So
Yeah.
really busy.
Wow. Yeah, no, you are super busy. I love that phrase you used, when you looked at your first business, the bones of the business. You wanted something that had good bones. What does that mean? Tell me what healthy bones look like for a business.
Yeah, for sure. And forgive me for looking down a couple times, but I made a couple of notes. And so I summarize things typically in threes, or kind of that 80-20 rule to focus on what matters most. These are the top three things that I was always looking for when I was looking at buying a business: a solid customer base. So we're typically looking at hopefully a decade or more of customers. And so we're looking at businesses that are typically smaller mom and pop shops that are owner operator, that don't understand what it takes to run a business. And I mean that in a compassionate way. They likely were the sole proprietor operating it and sort of juggling a whole bunch of balls. Whereas we really just focus on the business itself. So the first one was a solid customer foundation. Most of these mom and pop shops have them, and they have a good reputation. The second one was a lack of systems. And so typically the systems reside in their head. And so we try to find a business that does not have great systems, and then a lack of social media and online marketing. So something that does not have a website, they don't have a big presence. Those are the first three drivers for me. And then I think we just kind of focus on a 3-year goal of a 3 to 5 year turnaround. And those things involve a major CapEx review. Like, what would this business need if I was dreaming? And when I dream, I think of, if money was no object, what would I do to this business? And so we start to sort of build a package that says, we'll need this, a new router table for $100,000, and we're going to need, to improve all of the safety equipment. And so we come up with maybe a $200,000 or $300,000 CapEx. And then our company leases that equipment through another holding company that we have back to this organization. And there's a reason for that I'll explain in a moment. And then we really focus on the price list standardization. So a market review, like the current market that they're serving, is it the highest yield? And then finally, really putting those systems and training in place and standard operating procedures. And at the end of the day, it's my preference to do vendor financing and keep the equipment leased through us, so that we're hopefully making that interest along the way when we pass it to a successful bidder.
I find it, kind of amusing sometimes that things that a business owner and their advisors see as like, like you talked about, lack of systems in the business, right? Like any advisor would say, oh, this is going to be a big problem when you go to sell it. But there are a lot of acquirers out there that actually see that as a positive, something that they can fix. Now, I guess the only challenge for a seller is that you're not going to pay a top dollar for a business that's that's really kind of humming and has all these systems and processes in place. But the fact that you're actually looking for businesses that have some warts and some blemishes on it, that's attractive to you.
It's very attractive. And I'll give a good example. Like, one of the things when I was listening to the seller, and I'll mention it because it's sort of open forum anyway, but when I was buying the Banff Sign Company, the original owner had founded it in 1986. So we were buying it in 2017. Somewhere along the way, relationships got soured with the town of Banff. So the town of Banff is obviously more so the governing body inside the national park, and really dictates our permitting. And we'll just say the business is at the town of Banff's mercy. So to start a war, as the former owner did with the town of Banff, is bad for business. And so as soon as I heard that, it's like an alarm bell. So it may turn other buyers off. And maybe that was one reason why he wasn't successful in selling it to someone else before I came along. But all I saw was an opportunity to repair that relationship. And really, that's the very first thing that we did. We met with our stakeholders and walked the whole community and said, now that we own the business, what would you like to see from us? And we've improved that relationship. I can't necessarily provide a quantification, but probably tripled our business just with the town of Banff alone. So that was a low-hanging fruit to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I work with a lot of business owners that think and want to kind of implement an acquisition strategy. But they come across these risks, right? And they see them more as like deal killers, right? Where as soon as they see the risk, they think, oh no, like I can't get over this hurdle. How do you, like, you obviously frame that differently, where you see it as an opportunity? Is that just your, at the onset, you said you were a very optimistic guy. Do you think that's just your mindset, or was that something you had to develop over the way, where you had to look at these risks and flip it on its head and invert it and say, where is the opportunity here?
Yeah, so and that's a great point. I got started when I was young, sort of jumping into things without both eyes wide open. And then probably a fortunate perspective would be that it was luck in the beginning. I was 19 years old, buying and flipping houses, and I hadn't been burned. So this is probably the very first part. And so typically when people start thinking about starting a business, if they're in their 30s or their 40s, or they've become disdained in their workplace and they're 40 to 50 years old and they want to start something on their own, somewhere along the line they may have been burned. And I use this analogy that a cat that jumps on a hot stove to get the goodies and gets burned will never jump on a hot stove again, but it'll also never jump on a cold stove. And so then it misses out on all of those future opportunities because it had once been burned. And so I think for the first 10 years of my career, I never got burned, never substantially financially. And then in 2019, I had one six-figure loss. And so then I kind of felt, yeah, that can sting. And I can see how some people, and it was something that was glaring throughout the due diligence process that I should have paid more attention to. And so one of those reasons I think is that some people may have been scorned along the way. But I do take an optimistic approach that almost everything can be solved if you put a little bit of elbow grease into it and brain power. And I'm definitely a risk taker. That comes with the entrepreneurial side. I really love the thrill of putting a deal together. It's probably more of an addiction than anything. And sort of sometimes the hairier the beast, the better.
Yeah, I try to, and I have been thinking about this lots lately, just working with clients on the acquisition side. But I mean, there's various ways to mitigate any risk that you find, right? And I bucketed them into three areas. So the first would be, through the agreement. So, reps and warranties, indemnifications. The second might be price and terms, right? If you find a risk that you can't overcome, you might want to go back and renegotiate. And the third is like operational, right? Which is what you had mentioned, where you just roll up your sleeves and you fix it. I mean, have you kind of employed those three? Have you thought about it in that way, or how do you approach it when you're come to a deal and you see these due diligence items that you see as risks?
Yeah, okay, that's a great point. And so I have certainly had holdback agreements. We would not release funds until X was completed, where we had found something that was unsavory for us. So I think that would kind of classify in the agreement on number one. I probably haven't explored number two very much. That's a tough question. It's going to keep me thinking. I don't have a good answer for that, John. Maybe we'll come back to it and something will jog my memory as
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think maybe it's a framework you can think of, right? Like there's those three buckets of mitigating risk. And, it's fresh in my mind too, because I've only recently sat down and really kind of put pen to paper on thinking through this. Because I've seen, this from entrepreneurs all the time, that they're, when they haven't done an acquisition and they're jumping into it and they're excited about the idea, but they're very hesitant on, maybe they don't have the optimism that a guy like you would have, right? To see the positives versus the negatives. And I'm trying to get them over the hump to say, okay, there's a flip side to this, and this is how you can mitigate it. So I'm trying to develop a framework around that.
One technique that I usually use as I'm entering this, well, something jogs my memory. The first one is somewhat on the operational side and the purchase price. Because my MO would be buying retirees' businesses, revamping them, giving them a digital footprint and a new brand identity, that I feel comfortable and I know how to do this. And I typically pay the seller closer to what they're asking, if not what they're asking. So in many cases, I've just paid it straight across. This is your asking price. I'll take it. But what I'm asking for is, from more on your point number three, an operational standpoint. When I need help, I need you to come back. I need to be able to call you. I need some help, because they know the business inside and out. I've found that by paying that extra premium to them, or not negotiating them down on their price very hard, that they're far more favorable to give us some assistance when we need it. So that would definitely be one. The train that I had on the other one is gone. So
that's an awesome point, actually. I've never really thought about that, but there's got to be some point where their ask versus what's reasonable is just too wide. Yeah. So in those instances, you just cut bait really quick and move on to the next one.
Definitely. I kind of look at, from our perspective too, what can we do from a core services offering that I can provide. So I would say that I have 5 key staff members out of 60 that I take along with me in almost every venture. That includes, web design, some of the branding, the social media marketing. I've always used the same lawyer. I've always used the same accountant. And then I feel like, as we enter this, I make the phone call. Hey, we got this, whatever it is, a new acquisition, an asset, a property, could be an Airbnb model, could be a new business, or even buying some assets that are getting rolled in. Everybody knows what to do, and they roll up their sleeves and we jump right into it. Yeah, I don't know, actually. I feel you've got my mind racing on a couple of things now that I have to jot down. So yeah, keep going with your line of questioning, John. This is
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
good
Yeah,
talk.
no, I like, I really like the, I'm kind of preaching here around this idea. And the reason I'm super grateful to have you as a guest is just this opportunity around acquisition, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't start a business, you acquired your first business. And there's such an aging demographic of business owners out there that are needing guys like you that have kind of the motivation, that have the energy, that have the knowledge on how to pull something together. I see this as an opportunity that so many other business owners can take advantage of. So, what would be some advice that you would give to those guys? Like, and the other thing that I see is that, once you've done it once, you probably gained a lot of confidence after you realize that, hey, this is an awesome way. Like, I got a great business for a good price that's cash flowing. I'm going to do it again. So when did you like get on that thought of like, I'm going to acquire a whole bunch of business? This is going to be what I'm doing for the
Yeah.
next foreseeable future here.
People, my neighbors in my cul-de-sac are somewhat perplexed as to what I do. So they kind of ask like, well, there's a Range Rover like in the driveway, and he doesn't seem to go to work. Like he doesn't leave.
Yeah.
But most of it is done, especially virtual now. But business for us is 24 hours a day. So we're living what we want to do, both my wife and myself. I'll give you some background. The first business that we acquired had good bones. It was put together by a shop teacher. He was a former high school teacher that was screen printing on the side. That sort of ballooned into 28 schools as major accounts in Alberta. And then he's printing all of the gear, and it was systemized. He had all their artwork classified. It was organized in folders, and his file structures were very organized. And he had a price list. And I thought, this is a really good business to walk into. They were desperate to sell, and hadn't found the right person. That potentially, I think I came along when I bought that one when I was 22 years old, and I was young and eager. I had a little bit of a down payment saved up, but I guess our win in that case was I just blatantly asked him for vendor financing with no interest. I said, would you be willing to vendor finance 50% of the sale over the course of 1 year, and I'll pay you every 3 months out of the profit that the company's making? And he said, yep, just instantly. There was no negotiation. It's like, this is fantastic. So had I not made the big ask, which I thought at the time was like pretty audacious for me to even ask, and that led me down this road that he was helpful. He was monitoring our sales. He was coaching us along to make sure he got his money as well at the end of the year. And to give you an idea on that business, it had a net profit of $200,000 a year, and I bought it for $120,000. I put $60,000 down, and he financed the other $60,000. So to think about it, like who wouldn't take the deal? And so at the end of the year, on our first year, we had $180,000 profit. So we didn't do as well as the former owner, but we essentially paid the entire investment back inside the first year, and then that was history for the rest of it afterwards. At that time, the business was fairly small. And then over the next 9 years, we grew it 12 times. So 12x in overall sales. So the next business that I did was built from the ground up, which was 310 Sign, which was infinitely more difficult. And so getting back to your advice question would be, buy retiring businesses. I believe that there's a huge market for it. I think that there's a whole model around this, and it's not just a small mom and pop shop. There are people that have $100 million a year business that don't have succession planning or an exit plan in place, and they're waiting for a group of young guys to get together to take over a business like this. And they're typically really favorable. Like those guys have made their money. They're willing to help out a young guy or girl. And really that's what we're leaning on is looking for people that are probably in that 60 to 65 or even just past the 65-year-old range and are done. They don't want to put the backs into it or their elbows are hurting, and we understand. So we're here to alleviate that from them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the individual, but there's also corporations, right? That you already have an existing business like you do on the sign side, right? That wants to roll up an industry or wants to consolidate an industry, but has never gone through an acquisition. Like, I mean, the same. I think the same principles and the same opportunity exist for them too.
Yeah. Yeah.
One
And
thing
I never thought, like when I first started this, when I was, in my early 20s, that now that I'm 36 years old, that we would be doing $1 million a month in signage. And it was never a thought. It just kind of like everything built as stairs. and it took time to get there, but now I don't think about it. Now it's like you get a purchase order request for $500,000 and you're like, awesome. When's the next one coming? And you just,
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah, for sure. One thing you mentioned that I think is important to kind of note is that you had money down when you did your first acquisition. Like there are a lot of people, I think, preaching the no money down, get a business on full vendor financing. And that might happen, once out of, 50 times because there's somebody that's super desperate out there. But I think you made a really good point in your initial story and your journey that you had cash saved up. Like you wrote a check, right? So you took the risk. And I think that's important for anybody that's listening to kind of hear is that you can't get something for nothing. Whenever I've seen somebody do an acquisition, they actually have to write a check because they're skin in the game. So
But there's an old saying, although I don't know the history of it, but essentially a warship, and the warships are coming to shore, and then the captains of the ships, they burn the ships because there's no way back.
yeah,
And so they said, there's only two ways: you either die or you win. And so winning to me was the only option. And so when I went into something like that and I looked and I said, I have $65,000 to my name, I'm going to put $60,000 down on this business and have nothing left. It has to win. Then I firmly believe of putting all my cards out and pushing it all in because you've got skin in the game. And so if you have $0 down, how motivated really can you be to make all the ends meet? Because nowadays giving up is too easy. Bankruptcy, creditor protection, within 5 to 7 years, you're back in the game like nothing happened. And so that's not my style. I've made a commitment to pay back every dollar that we've ever borrowed. And I definitely like to sit with at least 20 to 50% equity in all of our ventures right off the hop.
yeah. I mean, it was obviously important to you. I like that analogy of no turning back, burn the boats. So you had to win. But it's convincing to the seller, right? Like here's a 22-year-old kid that's writing a check for 60 grand, and so I'm going to back him. You know what I mean? I'm going to I believe what he said because he's writing a check for it. So Warren Buffett has a great saying around that, like writing a check separates commitment from conversation, and I truly believe that, and especially on the acquisition side.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And that guy, Warren Buffett, he's pretty smart.
Yeah, he's done okay.
He's all right.
He's made a few bucks.
Yeah.
So this like the roll up strategy on the sign side, again, I'm trying to educate entrepreneurs on this because there's such an opportunity. And the other hurdle, in addition to kind of the risks around due diligence, the other hurdle that I often find is like, I don't know where to find deals, right? So maybe let's talk about deal sourcing. Like, how do you find deals? How are you kind of communicating deals to the marketplace that you're an acquirer, that you've done acquisitions? This is obviously a good example. You're doing a great job of kind of identifying and communicating what you're interested in acquiring. But how have you created that deal flow? I find that's often challenging for business owners.
Oh, yeah, it's a good idea or a good question. Most of mine were online searches, which is not necessarily the best. I hadn't typically used a broker. I think for the most part, because the acquisition sizes that we're looking at were still quite small, where I felt comfortable doing them. I think for the most part, everything that I've bought has been under $1 million, so it's not extremely substantial. I've used places like businessesforsale.com. That's actually where I found BAMP Sign Company. Some of them are through my own personal network. I typically don't advertise that I'm in the business of seeking out an opportunity to buy another company. And mainly is that I don't want to be inundated with a whole bunch of opportunities that I can't action. But I know that I'm always watching for auctions. I'm watching for companies that may sound like they're in distress from the industry. There's always gossip around the industry. We also look at a roll-up perspective of something that's unique that we don't have. And so we have a 55,000 square foot manufacturing plant on the south side of Edmonton. And I kind of treat it like a ghost kitchen. So a ghost kitchen, for the sake of just explaining it, is a kitchen that does not have a sign outside or a name, and a whole bunch of entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, even chefs, are cooking inside the kitchen using common space, and they're producing their own orders. So on one side, you may have Irish pub food coming out. On the other side, you have Korean food. And Skip the Dishes drivers are all coming to the ghost kitchen to pick up these locations. So they essentially operate online or in a Skip the Dishes model. So our sign business, which kind of hovers around $10 million a year, is made up of a variety of 5 different sign companies, but they really have one address and everything is coming out of one central location. So now I'm able to use my IT, safety, payroll, and HR services as common services for the group of companies. And I can start rolling up my mom and pop shops that don't have a safety officer program, for instance. And now I really can downsize potentially some of the people that are there and roll their business into mine, shut their location. We don't have to have a footprint wherever they were before, and all of our central manufacturing comes out of one plant. And then we have a digital strategy, what I call all roads lead to Rome, where we have about 150 domain names that are advertising all kinds of different things. Like, for instance, we have Banff Sign Company, but we also own jaspersigns.ca, golfcoursesigns.ca. We own safetysigns.ca, traffic signs, trafficrentals.ca, and everything essentially flows back to one organization. The roll up just makes it so much easier now. Within 6 months, we can buy a company, indoctrinate them into our company culture, and it's probably extract the 80% of customers that were making a ton of money, and kind of with the confidence that we have enough revenue and our sales and profitability is strong, that I don't need the small customers, that I can politely start declining that segment of business, or maybe even if it's a big enough segment, selling it off to a small supplier just as an asset sale, like a price list or a customer list.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty awesome strategy. Did you develop that strategy in the shower one day, or was
I don't
that
know.
developed over time,
I think
as you were in the business thinking through this and really, trying to piece it together in your brain?
definitely a thinker. Like, I put a lot of thought into this. I think of a lot of people don't realize, even John Carvello, who's on the call, don't think about the fact that what we are doing right now is a set of decisions that we made 2 or 3 years ago. So yours may have been the idea of getting into the podcast and having Divestopedia. And so, like, you started strategizing about that 2 or 3 years ago. And so I'm thinking about things that are 2 or 3 years ahead right now. Like, where am I going to be at 40 years old? My birthday's next month. I'll turn 37. So I have a 3-year window. I've got a very clear picture of where I want to be, and I am always strategizing. But if I ask somebody that has their MBA, who's highly experienced in business, or an entrepreneur who is blue collar, who dropped out of high school, that owns a $50 million company, what is business strategy? Everybody will have a different answer. To me, business strategy is saying no. I know it sounds weird, but the first thing that I need to identify is that we can't do everything. And so my business strategy is, what can I say no to when I'm acquiring this business? And then how do I streamline it to that 80-20 Pareto's law? I really just want to squeeze the most out of it. And my philosophy would be operating small, delivering large, or at least looking a lot bigger than we actually are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you saying yes to this podcast. So no, that's great. Yeah, and that I love that idea of the ghost kitchen, where you're bringing in other pieces and then finding some synergies. With I guess expanding on synergies, do you consider those when you're looking at an acquisition? Do you think about, hey, like, I can kind of cut costs by 20% by bringing in this person's operations into my operations? Or do you think about, hey, like, I can probably expand this business pretty quickly and see some upside on the revenue? Do you think about that, and do you consider that into what you're willing to pay, given that, if you're able to execute, you can generate a higher return on just paying by a higher price?
Yeah, I do think about it, but I only think about the cost reduction for a very short period of time, because cost reduction or lowering my cost is not our strategy. It's an essential activity that every business should undertake once every 2 years or once every year. Just to look at your cost, to really say, like, do I need that subscription to this? And it's funny that these small things nickel and dime you over time. but you hit the nail on the head. If I think about a V, this is where most businesses in the center fail. There are only two ways to differentiate yourself. On this side, it's the low cost model. On this side, it's value based, which you already know this. It's like the Apple thing versus Walmart, for instance. So there's only two ways to differentiate yourself on a low cost model. It's, you know, buying power and getting things cheaper, squeezing your suppliers. And it's not very exciting, and it's definitely not my business model. There is an infinite amount of ways to differentiate yourself on the high end model, if you will, or the value model, where you start specializing and becoming more focused on a certain segment of business. The problem that every business has is not having that very clear divide. They're trying to appease both sides. They're caught in limbo in the middle. They can't do it as cheap as the cheap provider. They can't do it as well as the high value provider. And so I instantly shift everything to the high value side. So that's where we start playing with the big dogs. That's where we get the Amazon contracts, the Lululemon contracts, North Face, Patagonia. It's on the high side for sure.
So you're probably adding costs to acquisitions, and this is something that I see all the time. A lot of people talk about cost synergies, but they don't talk about, you know, additional costs when they bring a business in. You know, your initial example of the business you bought with lack of systems, you know, there's money that needs to be invested into these business to build these systems and build that value that you talk about. So is it the other way for you, that most of your acquisitions are going to be kind of incurring costs to get them to where you want them to be?
Yeah, I think so. That'd probably be a good description. I definitely incur the costs. I guess what we don't do well, that we probably look at the moment, is that we don't put a lot of time tracking or cost reimbursement for our core team of, say, those 5 executives that jump in. It's like, I know that their salaries are covered. Some people on my team, I've put money in the bank away to cover their salary for 10 years. I said, you're with me with everything I'm going into. So I haven't thought of them as a cost to me in general. So if I was to put a business model together, I definitely have a parent company that will provide services to the other businesses. If these ones start generating enough cash flow, I will pay back the parent company for the services that were provided. But I try not to overload the smaller organizations with those extra costs if possible. Most of it's just brain power and time. So it's about reorganizing the business, the spreadsheets and all that stuff. CapEx wise, I don't think it's that big of a deal for the cash injections that's happening. But we are working on these businesses for 12 to 18 months, you know, fairly consistently. A lot of labor is going into them. You know, we probably have a fairly high salary on those top few people. Really, at the end of the day, because I'm the majority shareholder of all of the ventures, typically 65% or greater, and I do have investors who kind of adhere to our philosophy, we win on payday. So we win when the companies sell and everybody gets all of that big kind of, the payday money is the end goal that we look for.
Yeah, no, for sure. So last thing I want to touch on is just around integration of these businesses. What would you say is, and I don't have a lot of expertise, if I'm being super honest, on kind of just the integration of bringing two businesses together. I've been involved in a lot of acquisitions, but, you know, we actually, you know, our integration was like, you know, cut and kind of bring all back office stuff into a parent company. But in terms of like integrating, what do you think are some best practices that you've kind of employed in your acquisitions around that?
One of the first ones was exit of the old owner immediate. That's an interesting one. So most people rely on the other person for X period of time, and it might be you have to stay on board for 6 months or a year. I took the opposite approach, mainly because we were somewhat comfortable in the businesses that we had, or we knew the industry and the line of business. So we would give them 3 weeks. So 3 weeks, I just need to touch base on changing the phone services over, signing authorities, all that stuff. And then I'm letting them go into their retirement. I always have the caveat that I want to contact you after. So that kind of is how I deal with the former owners or the former management in some cases. I've been on both ends. I've been with a business that has been acquired, and I've also been the acquiree. I've seen it from both sides. I can very confidently say that when we acquire a business, our integration is much better than what I've felt the other way around. So it's been good for me from a learning experience on both sides. Company culture, which will be a very hot topic for everybody, is certainly something that I play a big part in. I spend time with every one of the people that are getting integrated, probably getting to know what some of their frustrations are and leaning on the psychological safety. Like, it's a safe place to tell me, if you hated this company, now is your time to tell me. Like, we have a chance to fix this. But otherwise, systems, I'm all about the systems and I'm all about software. And so I think that our greatest integration is in realigning the whole company with a better ERP system. And so when we look at enterprise resource planning, I'm looking at the business as a whole, and probably I get the most information out of that trying to implement a new system, because it forces me to know almost every facet of the business. So I need to know how our shipping and receiving works. I need to know how manufacturing works. I need to know how purchasing works, HR, payroll, and then the training and the onboarding come shortly after that. But no BS, we write it down and we document it, and we have training manuals for staff members. They crave direction. They need direction. So integration is all about company culture, the psychological safety of having people talk back, because I want to know what's wrong with the company before I get in. And then really that the new software and the systems play a big part.
Yeah, I love the way, you said that it's getting rid of the old owner is maybe in some cases the best way to integrate. And I've seen that too, where, a lot of other stakeholders like, banks, they want to, you have the hooks on the old owner. They feel like there's less risk if the old owner stays around. But in a lot of cases that, you need to, as an acquirer, there's a need for a lot of change, a lot of kind of moving forward away from what's been done to what it should be done. And, keeping the old owner around is sometimes a hurdle to get that accomplished.
I think it creates conflict in a sense, and not physical conflict, but conflicting message to staff members, because no doubt that from the former owner that has any employees, some level of trust and loyalty has been built up. And so when new person, young guy, corporation, whatever it is, comes in to acquire, it's like, well, they kind of already have their backs up. I'm going to listen to the old owner because this is what they said. And it's like, well, I'm the new owner, or I'm the new boss, or whatever you want to call it. You have to listen to me. Well, removing the former owner makes that so much easier. It's like, there's nobody else to run to. We're making changes. Let's go.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never really thought of it that way, right? Where there's that conflicting, like, okay, who do I listen to here? Do I listen to the guy that I've listened to for the last 10 years, or do I listen to this new guy that I don't know anything about? So just cutting the ties is not a bad way to do it.
There's typically a lot of seller's remorse that might set into and seeing their baby change. And I had been always non-emotional from day one. I've always named the businesses that were somewhat unique. They were never tied to my name, never called it Brennan signs or used my last name, for the sake that I knew I was not going to be around forever. I had meant to sell it, and I try not to get emotionally attached to the businesses. I get emotionally attached to the people that are there, but not the businesses themselves. And when I do sell them off, I certainly wish the very best for them, and I'm always monitoring and making sure that they're still running high levels of success.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, Kelso, I'm super appreciative of you joining me here today. I think you've given our audience a really great overview of your experience on buying and selling businesses, and just given a lot of things for me to think about in this process. So again, thanks a lot for joining me, and yeah, maybe we'll do this again.
You bet. It was really my pleasure. Thank you very much, John.
All right, take care.